Threshold. There is a pale door with a black handle. It is unremarkable other than the fact that this door can seemingly appear anywhere. Sometimes the door is in places it should not be. Sometimes it stands alone, attached to nothing at all. The one thing you are sure of is that it is the same door each time, one you have not yet been able to open. Fallout Table, Entry 11. Liminal Horror is a classless, rules-light modern cosmic horror game by Goblin Archives, inspired by Yokai Gall's Karn, as well as Chris McDowell's Into the Odd and Ben Milton's Knave. It originally released in 2021. There is a full web-based version of the game text that can be found online for free and in other digital forms on places like itch.io. Print copies are available via Exalted Funeral and other indie game retailers. The game uses a classic GM and player structure with a focus on making rulings during play, presenting engaging situations, and creating an interesting story. There's nothing all that new here, but it does denote a specific style of facilitated open play rather than a more traditional GM-led and solely curated experience. A big differentiation here, especially among other horror games in the space, is the call out for the facilitator to always provide players with as much information as possible to help fuel the party's problem solving. This is not a game of failed library use checks and unseen clues, something I've frequently encountered in my many years with Call of Cthulhu. If you made the choice to research the Hall of Records, you find the information. If you stopped to scour the room for clues, you find the hidden doorway. This is one of the game's defining aspects in my mind. Stress mechanics are not new, especially in the horror space, but the shape and structure of Fallout, something you suffer after taking too much stress, is a standout reinvention of what is typically used to emulate sanity, trauma, or mental illnesses. Here, Fallout acts as a way in which your character is changed, probably forever, by being exposed to the weird truths and old powers of the world. But those changes are often a blend of positive and negative effects that reshape how you approach the world around you, your fellow party members, and the investigation going forward, rather than simply pulling you out of the story by placing you in a sanitarium out of sight and out of play, or in a harmful or stereotypical sort of play acting of actual mental illnesses. Classless games are nothing new, even in the horror gaming space, but what is presented here is streamlined, easy to understand, and open for a wide variety of character concepts. That said, folks who look for more mechanical depth to their characters may be left wanting. This is a system that relies on you to bring most of your character's defining features to play, rather than them being explicitly marked on your character sheet or represented mechanically with concrete bonuses or abilities. The hit protection, used rather than health, does create a nice ebb and flow of tension and calm required for most horror storytelling to work well, and the more your table leans into that, moments of calm to growing dread to terrifying climax to moments of calm again to growing dread to terrifying climax cycle the hit protection supports, the better. Simply put, there is no traditional mechanical growth or advancement for your character here. There's no leveling up or gaining experience points, but that does not mean you're unable to grow in your abilities or power within the world and story. Many Fallouts offer a change and often bonus to one or more of your core ability scores or HP, further incentivizing players to send their characters into the dark corners of the earth, but just enough to learn and to be changed, but hopefully still survive. Relics and magic offer ways for a character to wield new power, but only after they sought them out through clever play or thorough investigation. Additionally, most of Liminal Horror's adventures are set in a modern city or within an open community, allowing players to cultivate relationships, connections, or even join factions and groups in order to raise their standing in the world. Much like the character creation, this game requires the player to set their own goals and create their own advancement within the world, rather than relying on their character sheet. The weird. This is another of Liminal Horror's strongest aspects to me. Fallout, relics, essentially the game's magic items, and magic itself all act as this game's closest analog to character advancement, and all three of them act to continually open the scope of the weirdness of the world as the players become more and more exposed to things they once believed to be impossible. Magic especially is something that its mechanical design here can never be entirely known or fully controlled by the players. Spells are open to interpretation with the use of a keyword system, and they shift into something entirely new every time they are used, and just with the passage of time. There are strange omens and terrible catastrophes that may come from their use, but they can level the playing field of a dangerous encounter or particularly tough case. The open to interpretation nature of the spellcasting itself also gives both players and the facilitator ample room to connect their magic to known entities and powers within the story, or to expand the corners of the weird unknown with something totally new. Surely if there's one forgotten ancient god, there must be more, right? And if there are more, then what else must be out there? Powers exist well beyond our understanding, and some entities in the world knowingly work for these powers, while others are unknowingly a part of a larger plan or cycle, as the player characters may be. This is standard cosmic horror stuff, and honestly, since the game does not reinforce these powers or entities in any mechanical ways, there's no Cthulhu mythos-like skill here, for example, this aspect of the game can be easily removed if desired. To some, I imagine that may be a negative, but to others, it will probably be a selling point, because it means the system can do more than old gods and hidden cultists. I've found that in play, the Fallout system ensures that the supernatural, the weird, and the unknown are always present in liminal horror, but you can shape them to be as traditionally cosmic horror or not as you'd like. Death is always possible, and nearly all threats encountered by the players are truly dangerous, but similarly to the player choice highlight from earlier, those dangers and threats should always be known to the player. High stakes are common in horror games, as actions need to have often stark consequences to be frightening, but liminal horror does a good job of reminding the facilitator of the importance of making those threats known to the player. It isn't scary to be killed out of nowhere. An unknown threat does not build tension, nor does it make a character fearful, and it certainly doesn't lead to tough, interesting decisions for the players. At 36 pages, including a sample investigation, the entire game is quick to read and easy to play. The presentation in this original print run could be flashier or filled with more bespoke art, but it's well presented and acts as a wonderful reference document during play, which is 90% of how I actually use game books. Plus, I found its somewhat detached voice and clean layout to give the entire book a sense of unease and dread as I read it, like it was a press release describing a terrible event. All told, liminal horror has become my go-to modern horror game, eclipsing more traditional and complex games like Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green. It eschews the problematic and frankly limiting nature of typical sanity systems for a much more interesting Fallout system. Magic is strange, ever-changing, and ultimately unknowable for the characters, even if they may wield it safely for a time. It turns away from the rarely used but catalog-like magic of traditional systems in favor of something just as unusual as its Fallout. The game's lack of mechanical advancement for characters pushes players to expose themselves to strange magics, experiment with dark artifacts, and build relationships within the world in order to level up. Beyond that, it's a system designed to stand out when it is interesting, to provide a tried and true framework for the usual moments of risk and uncertainty, and then to fade into the background for everything else. Add Goblin Archive's commitment to providing ample and often free or easily accessible expanded rules, guidance, adventures, and more to that, and Liminal Horror is a game that is easy to get into and easy to stick with over time. Thanks for watching this review. If the system sounds up your alley and you tend to enjoy my work, I actually wrote an adventure called Tunnels in White for Liminal Horror earlier this year. It's available in print or digitally. You can look at my profile to get more info there.